In a world where first impressions shape fate, a single miscalculated remark can unravel everything. When arrogance blinds judgment, the consequences can be unexpected. The low murmur of polished conversation intertwined with the soft clinking of glasses, painting an air of quiet sophistication. It was a Saturday night, the kind where deep velvet chairs absorb the very essence of refinement in the dim candlelit luxury of a downtown Chicago restaurant. Every guest carried themselves with an effortless grace, dressed in tailored suits and designer gowns, savoring their evening with practiced poise. Amid them sat Jonathan Carter, a man whose presence was easy to overlook at first glance. Clad in a well-fitted navy blazer over a crisp white shirt, he exuded an understated elegance, one that spoke not of labels, but of quiet authority. His laughter, warm yet knowing, carried across the table, his eyes twinkling with a depth that hinted at a man who had seen it all and remained firmly in command of the moment. For one waiter, however, Jonathan was just another guest, one among many. Eric, a young server in his mid-twenties, moved with a rigid professionalism, his spotless uniform offset by an air of concealed arrogance. As he approached the table, his eyes swept over the well-dressed diners, mentally cataloging them. The sharp suits, the luxury handbags, expected, predictable. But then, his gaze landed on Jonathan. No loud designer labels, no flashy accessories, just a man of quiet composure. To Eric, it was nothing more than ordinary. A judgment was made in an instant, an assumption formed without thought. And in that moment, he decided to push the boundary. "Good evening," Eric greeted smoothly, setting down the water glasses with a practiced, almost dismissive ease. "I hope you're all enjoying your meal. The steak here is excellent, perfect for those who don't mind indulging." He paused, turning to Jonathan with a knowing smirk. "But you seem more like a salad guy." "No offense, sir." The words lingered, hovering like an unwelcome aftertaste. A brief, almost imperceptible silence settled over the table. Jonathan's expression remained unreadable. His gaze steady, unshaken, locked onto Eric with an intensity the young waiter failed to register. Unaware of the shift in atmosphere, Eric, pleased with his own wit, turned away, scribbling down orders without a second thought. What he didn't realize was simple. Jonathan Carter was no ordinary guest. Power isn't always loud. Sometimes, it sits quietly at the corner of a restaurant, unnoticed, until the moment it chooses to be seen. Eric basked in his own sense of superiority, convinced that his offhand remark had landed just right. After all, this was a luxury restaurant, a place for the elite, the powerful, the ones who truly belonged. And Jonathan? To Eric, he was an anomaly, someone who didn't quite fit the mold of wealth and status. Eric had spent nearly 2 years serving the city's elite. The CEOs, the moguls, the individuals who wore their success as obviously as their tailored suits and high-end watches. He had come to see his job as a performance, where the affluent received meticulous attention, while the rest were simply there to eat, nothing more. But what Eric failed to see, what he couldn't possibly have known, was that he had gravely misjudged the man before him. Jonathan Carter had spent years shaping the world of technology, attending meetings with the most influential minds, and constructing an empire from the ground up. He had nothing to prove to a waiter who mistook arrogance for authority. The evening continued, plates were served, wine glasses refilled, and Eric carried on his routine with a practiced charm, engaging in polite banter with the regulars. Yet, something had shifted at Jonathan's table. The effortless conversation had dulled, replaced by an almost imperceptible tension. It was subtle, unspoken, but present nonetheless. And then, as the night drew to a close, the moment arrived. Jonathan reached into his pocket, retrieving his wallet as he rose from his seat. There was no grand display, no need for attention, just a quiet, effortless command of the space around him. As he stepped toward the host's stand, the man behind it suddenly froze, his expression shifting from professionalism to something resembling awe. "Mr. Carter," the host stammered, his voice betraying a new layer of respect. "It's an honor to have you dining with us tonight." I didn't realize." Eric felt his body tense. The name Carter. It echoed in his mind, searching for recognition. And then, it clicked. He turned just in time to see Jonathan pull out a sleek black credit card, the kind reserved for those at the pinnacle of power. The kind of card that signified not just wealth, but influence. Eric's stomach dropped. The realization hit like a cold wave. Jonathan Carter wasn't just another guest. He wasn't some forgettable diner at a corner booth. He was the Jonathan Carter, the visionary behind one of the most successful tech empires in the country. His name was on magazine covers, business headlines, and the inboxes of industry titans. And Eric had been blind to it. He stood frozen, unable to move, as the weight of his own arrogance came crashing down. Some lessons arrive like a whisper. Others crash down like a thunderstorm. For Eric, the truth had just struck like lightning, swift, undeniable, and utterly humiliating. The words echoed in Eric's head, louder now than they had been when he first uttered them. "You look more like a salad guy." What once seemed like a clever quip now rang in his mind like an unforgivable mistake. His face burned, his palms grew clammy, and a deep, sinking weight settled in his chest. He had misjudged, underestimated, a man who wasn't just another guest, but a force far beyond his reach. The host shot him a quick, almost sympathetic glance before turning his full attention back to Jonathan, ushering him toward the exit with a kind of reverence reserved for only the most distinguished patrons. The soft chime of the door closing behind him felt deafening. And just like that, Jonathan Carter was gone. Reality crashed down in full force. The carefully constructed world Eric had grown so comfortable in, where he believed he understood the unspoken rules of power and status, had been turned completely upside down. And now, only one question remained: what happens next? Mistakes can be forgotten. Misjudgments can be excused. But underestimating the wrong person, that's a lesson that lingers. Eric stood motionless, his thoughts a whirlwind of regret and disbelief. "You look more like a salad guy." The words pounded in his skull, each repetition making his shame heavier. His face burned, his hands grew clammy, and the weight of his own arrogance settled in his chest like a stone. He had made a fool of himself. Worse, he had judged a man solely on appearance, dismissing him as unimportant, only to discover, far too late, that he had been in the presence of someone far beyond his reach. The host cast Eric a fleeting look, one of mild sympathy, yet unmistakable disappointment, before refocusing on Jonathan. With a graceful nod, he escorted him toward the exit, his demeanor shifting to one of utmost respect. The soft chime of the door closing behind them felt deafening. And just like that, Jonathan Carter was gone. The world Eric thought he understood had unraveled before his eyes. The rigid social structure he believed in, the one where power was draped in designer suits and flashy displays of wealth, had been shattered in a single evening. Now, the only question that remained was what happens next.